Hello, everyone. My name is Jordyn Smith, and I am the voice and the astrologer behind this YouTube channel, Nonconformist Conscience, and also the webpage, nonconformistconscience.com. This week, we have quite a full moon happening in the sign of Sagittarius. This is building off of the energy of that Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, and also Mars conjunct the North Node in a new phase. Before I dive into what's going on astrologically this week, I wanted to say yesterday, the sun entered the sign of Gemini. So happy birthday to all of the Geminis out there. As you all know who follow me or subscribe to me to this channel, you know that I do a monthly birthday special. So for this month, up until the 20th of next month of June, I am doing the birthday special for Geminis. I would love to see you. Come see me. I love interacting with you guys. It also gives me an opportunity to learn more about how these archetypes are manifesting in your own individual life on your own path of evolution for this incarnation. If you want to come see me, the birthday special is $75. You will meet with me on Zoom, and we will go over your natal chart and your solar eclipse if that is what you are wanting. If you're just wanting to go over your natal chart, that's fine. I really kind of leave it up to you, but it is 90 minutes and I record it. And so after you meet with me, I send you the recording for you to have indefinitely so you can go back and rewatch it. And again, this is just something that I'm doing because I feel very honored by those of you who subscribe to me. This is my purpose in life. My purposeful work is to be a counseling astrologer, and you guys help facilitate in making that come true for me. So it's my way of saying thanks, and also I get to learn more about each one of you. Without further ado, let's talk about this week's forecast. So, as I said yesterday, the sun entered the sign of Gemini, which is really interesting to think about because this is on the heels of the North Node and Mars conjunct each other. Now, as a recap, when Mars was in Pisces and it conjunct Neptune, it was really helping us understand what our old desires that we've acted upon might have stemmed from our ideals. Like we each have desires that are sparked that, it's like, I want this relationship, or I want this job, this career, I want these types of friends. And when Mars was conjunct Neptune in the sign of Pisces, we were really looking at how our will was meeting that of sources or of another, and where our ideals played a role in facilitating this whole evolutionary cycle of growth. And as Mars moved into a new phase to Neptune, we were really called to release the old ideals that stemmed from beliefs that had been conditioned as a way to start creating new cycles for us, new desires to be acted upon. And as March approached this North Node, we were having to kind of suss out what's coming up for us. What is the knowledge that we gleaned during that whole evolutionary cycle? What did we learn from acting on the desires that were seeded into our consciousness at that time? So it taught us a lot about ourselves. Mars is the baby brother or the little brother of Pluto, where Pluto is our soul and our soul's evolution. Mars is the desires that are seeded into our consciousness that help to further our evolution. So we have this dynamic as we act on our desires, we self-discover. That's why Mars and Aries in the first house are the archetypes of self-becoming. It's through acting and initiating these types of dynamics that we receive feedback to understand ourselves further. So there's been this dissolving process, but also within that dissolving process, there has been content and information that is timeless and universal in nature that we've learned about ourselves and from all of our prior dynamics of acting on those desires that we're meant to utilize as a way to fortify our relationship to self, to become natural wisdom, natural inner knowledge. So now Mars has crossed over this North Node in the sign of Aries, and it's initiating a brand new evolutionary cycle of development, of understanding ourselves further in a whole brand new way. And so it's really about us understanding what our old patterns were. And now that we have been coming to understand this, now we have new desires that are sparked and seeded into our consciousness for us to act on or not to. It's our choice. But essentially, as we act on what is new and coming into our consciousness, we then receive more feedback that helps us create new patterns of awareness, of self-development, of understanding ourselves on ever deeper levels. And it's really interesting now that the sun is in Gemini. And the sun in Gemini is ruled by Mercury and Taurus. So this is where we're called to really self-actualize the sun through gaining knowledge, through seeking knowledge. And then with Mercury and Taurus facilitating this process, it becomes inner knowledge. And that inner knowledge becomes a natural resource, an inner resource for us as a way to strengthen and develop our relationship to self throughout this evolutionary cycle that has been initiated. So I wanted to touch on that. The other thing that I wanted to touch on is throughout this week, Ceres is at 21 degrees Capricorn retrograde. It is ruled by Saturn in Pisces, and it is square to Chiron in a last quarter square. So what does this mean? Because this is going to be playing out throughout the full moon in Sagittarius and throughout Venus entering Gemini, and same with Jupiter entering Gemini. So Ceres here in the sign of Capricorn is where we are called to really regain our nature, our soul essence, the undistorted parts of ourself. And that is through really utilizing its ruler Saturn and Pisces to dismantle and dissolve the old structures held within our consciousness that have been where maybe we have not been our own authority or outsourced an authority, right? Like going to different people, asking them, what do you think about this? What would the choice be if you were in this situation? Ceres and Capricorn is really helping us to facilitate in this process of emotional maturation by having us go to the polarity of Cancer to dive into our emotional reality as a way to mature. And as we are doing this, we are called to self-reflect. That's a Capricorn and a Saturnian function of self-reflection in order to have this emotional maturation process as a way to reconnect with our sense of natural authority. When Capricorn is naturally expressed, it likes to step outside of the status quo, and it has the ability to become a natural role model for others. It can be where we're reparenting ourselves, especially if we have a lot of conditioning around feeling an innate sense of judgment towards self or shame or guilt. And so it's having us reflect on all of this. That way we can dissolve these old structures that really aren't rooted in a timeless, universal nature. And so as Ceres is square Okay, I got bumped off the internet. As Ceres is square to Chiron in a last quarter phase, there can be dynamics that are popping up right now where we are meant to enter that emotional fracture, not in a way to be judgmental towards self, but it's really looking at how we have been utilizing this energy of Chiron um, to change our awareness around our wounds. And these are wounds stemming from how we've learned to interact with others. Are you someone who perpetually feels like you need to prove yourself? If so, that can be outsourcing your own authority. That actually speaks to insecurity. So Ceres square Chiron is really facilitating this process of changing our awareness as a way to cultivate an emotional maturation process. And with Chiron being ruled by Mars in a new phase conjunction to the North Node, we're really called to self-reflect on the old patterns that were perpetuated by our old wounds. And as we self-reflect, we gain ever deeper wisdom and knowledge around how we've structured our emotional dynamics stemming from traumatizing events or wounds around where we need to prove ourselves or feeling like we need to suppress our anger or where we're carrying unnatural guilt, all of these dynamics and how they have psychologically and emotionally affected us. And there's a need to be one's own authority and take responsibility and accountability for the choices that were made in the past by self-reflecting on the patterns that were perpetuated. And now with Mars in a new phase conjunction to the North Node, but approaching Chiron, so it's balsamic to Chiron, it's really about this continued process of self-reflecting, being responsive instead of reactive, being courageous, and looking at our inner emotional reality. So that way, as Mars passes over Chiron in a new phase later on this month, that we can create new patterns stemming from the awareness that is gleaned during this time. Remembering that the sun is in Gemini. So this is knowledge that we are coming to understand that is then taken in on an eternal level with Mercury in the sign of Taurus that then facilitates this process of inner awareness. And it can spark new ideas or new desires within us as a way to facilitate in the process of healing ourselves by being our own authority. So I really wanted to speak to that. The other dynamic with this is that Ceres is conjunct the South Node of Pluto. So we're dealing with lifetimes of conditioning that has perpetuated these patterns and these cycles. And the astrology is really reflecting that we are in a momentous amount of change right now. And when you pull in transiting Pluto in the sign of Aquarius, ruled by Uranus and Taurus, this is liberating from these dynamics of where we've over-identified with the trauma or the old beliefs wrapped up in the traumatic events in the old wounds. And it's about transforming this through cultivating new inner knowledge, new inner awareness about ourselves, our own patterns, and where those patterns come from and how they stem from our conditioning. So this is still facilitating this process of restructuring our consciousness right now. So let's now talk about this Sagittarius full moon. I am going to bring up this chart for all of us so you can follow along while I talk about this. First, I do want to point out what I was just speaking to, which is Ceres here at 21 degrees Capricorn is conjunct the South Node of Pluto. Both are ruled by Saturn and Pisces. This is even during this full moon, okay? So I want to actually speak on this just a little bit more since it is occurring during this full moon and it's pretty pronounced. This is, as I've said in the past, Saturn and Pisces is not only about restructuring our consciousness through dissolving these old barriers and limitations, revolving around our conditioning, what's been learned. And this is stemmed from not even just this lifetime, many lifetimes, seeing as Ceres is conjunct that South Node of Pluto. And there's this need, yes, to self-reflect, but also there is innate wisdom that is coming through when we self-reflect on where we made incorrect judgment and we're correlating it to how we've learned to make judgment calls. And Saturn and Pisces is really wanting us to look at all of the man-made laws and structures that are actually distortions of natural law. And this is really heightened during this full moon because this full moon is in Sagittarius, and Sagittarius is all about natural law. It's about beliefs versus truths, authenticity. It is about what feels most natural to us. It is about honesty and sincerity. And on the flip side, it's about dishonesty and insincerity. So we can really see that Ceres is playing a really big role in facilitating this full moon and what it's speaking to. If you think back to December 12th of 2023, we had a new moon in Sagittarius, and that was reflecting a new cycle of emotional dynamics that are correlated to expanding upon our relationship to self, seeing as that new moon was also ruled by Jupiter in Taurus. Now, at the end of this 6-month cycle, we're in a full phase, right? It's a full moon, not a new moon. And a full moon speaks to emotional dynamics surfacing so that we can compare and contrast from the past to the present moment, all that we've been learning throughout the totality of this 6-month cycle. So really think and reflect on what was going on back on December 12th and throughout this 6-month cycle. So that way you can start comparing and contrasting what needs to be thrown off. Essentially, that is what a full moon is speaking to, is the need. It has a Libran type of feel to it, a need to compare and contrast, to throw off or oppose what shouldn't be there anymore, and then also to have a full integration of the lessons that are gleaned throughout the totality of this time. So when we're looking at this chart also, we have Ceres that's facilitating this process. It's saying to self-reflect on man-made distortions, to take what's universal, the need to also self-reflect on our own personal beliefs and philosophies, and to throw off the distortions of the past pertaining to beliefs. That way we can connect on a more authentic level. Ceres is facilitating this throughout an emotional maturation process. And when we look at this full moon, it is sextile, in a last quarter sextile to Pluto retrograde in Aquarius, ruled by Uranus and Taurus, okay? So this is really helping us and facilitating this process of having an integration of a whole entire evolutionary cycle of Jupiter being in Taurus, which is now at the anaretic degree, 29 degrees, where we can see that we're wrapping something up in order to start a brand new cycle. So Pluto here is really speaking to the need to liberate from the old crystallizations revolving around belief structures of where that's been conditioned. And now that you've been expanding upon your relationship to self, it's a bit easier to compare and contrast the past to the present moment to understand where the distortions lie. What is a belief about yourself versus a truth, right? And I've been talking about that for weeks. And so this is really helping us to facilitate in this process of transforming our inner relationship to self by getting more in touch with our personal truths. It's really amped up during this full moon. So it's also, you know, this is coming after that Jupiter-Uranus conjunction that happened, and it's still in a new phase. So this is really speaking to, if we're comparing and we're contrasting and we're liberating through self-reflecting on these dynamics, in order to have this integration and transformative process, we're needing to lean into intuiting what feels authentic for us and feels true at this point in time. If we are meant to be liberating from old beliefs that have been conditioned, we're wanting to understand, well, what does feel true? What type of philosophical, cosmological system do I feel intuitively drawn to in order to have a standard to understand what feels authentic revolving around my needs and my values and what I want to give meaning to. And this creates the transformative process. Then you also have Venus here in a new phase conjunction to Jupiter. This is speaking to applying what we glean from this full moon, what we're opposing and what we're integrating, and then starting a new cycle of self-development on an internal level. And then this is going to be really facilitated because at the end of the day or later on in the day, it's around 3:53 p.m. Central Standard Time. Venus is going to enter the sign of Gemini, which is going to be a month-long cycle. June 17th, I believe it enters the sign of Cancer. But it's going to be a month-long cycle of wanting to seek out new information in order for it to become inner knowledge and to facilitate more inner awareness. And that is seen by Mercury being it will be the ruler of Venus and Gemini, and Mercury is still in Taurus. So we can see that in order to kind of jumpstart this dynamic of Venus entering into the sign of Gemini, and then a couple days later, Jupiter is going to enter the sign of Gemini. We're needing to have a review on what needs to be thrown off, what doesn't feel authentic to us. And then when you look at Jupiter and Venus in this new phase conjunction, it is sextile in a crescent phase to Neptune. As we consciously work with this energy to self-reflect, to oppose old dynamics, old ideals that are tethered to old beliefs and distortions, rooted in man-made mumbo jumbo, essentially, we get to understand what is timeless and universal and to have a full integration of that for it to become inner awareness and inner knowledge. This also is helping to perpetuate this Mars conjunct the North Node in a new phase to create new patterns that help in this restructuring of our consciousness. This is seen with Saturn and Mars are in a semi-sextile. So there is a lot of information that can be intuited during this full moon. Whatever comes and is seeded into your consciousness during this week, there is a need to consciously work with the intuition. And then when we're looking at the sun is in the 9th house, we will then gather even more information, new knowledge that helps for us to 9th house expand upon our consciousness. You know, Saturn, Pluto in Aquarius is also trine and a disseminating trine to the sun, this is really helping us. If we utilize this time period, we can intuit what is needing to be liberated from in order for transformation to occur on a deeper level. We also have, let me see where I want to go with all of this. The other thing I want to say with Venus, Jupiter in a new phase conjunction and sextile to Neptune is this is really, yes, intuition, but paying attention to our inner voice because it is connected to our soul. And if we're wanting to create new patterns in order to initiate a new cycle of evolutionary development and expansion, as a way to fortify our inner relationship to self and to have an emotional maturation process, we are needing to really tap into what is the inner guidance? What is the inner direction? What are you intuiting that you want to learn or understand about yourself? And then to not sit there and try to analyze it, but just to pose the question, because this full moon can really have it to where um, self-realized knowledge is seeded into your consciousness through the Jupiter Sag function of intuition. So the other thing that I want to say is Ceres is in a disseminating trine to Uranus. And this is just, again, it's a repeating signature of helping us to liberate from distortions, how we've structured our reality, how we've structured our emotionality, stemming from what has been learned. And for a transformation to occur, the need to self-reflect on these past dynamics, to look at how it has played a role in our emotional reality. What has created insecurity? Where do we feel secure? Is it healthy security? Is it security where we're being our own authority and being self-reliant and not outsourcing it from something outside of ourselves? Or do we need to really come into an awareness about the why if we're still perpetuating these dynamics? So with the phasal relationship, though, if you consciously have a sincere intention to understand about this, that information can really be seeded into your consciousness at this point in time. It's also interesting to look at that Vesta is in Cancer, ruled by this full moon, and is square to Mars. Vesta is where we keep that inner devotion, that sacred flame of devotion alive. And this is about cultivating inner security, inner emotional validation. And square to Mars, and a last quarter square is, this can be, there are things that I'm wanting to act on right now, but I'm really afraid to act on them because I don't know what to believe. And that is pulling in the ruler of Vesta, the moon, being in Sag, the beliefs wrapped around this. So if that is you and you're kind of having this, I don't know what to believe in, there's a need to reflect, to pull in the polarity. And, Ceres is opposing this. So there's this beautiful goddess energy facilitating this full moon as a way to help us recover what's natural about us. There can always be insecurity when we're initiating something new. And with Vesta and Cancer square to Mars, this is really speaking to just really establishing and being honest with oneself that, hey, anytime we are creating new patterns, Mars in a new phase to the North Node, it's going to induce insecurity because it's not known. Our power does not lie within the unknown. It creates a lot of insecurity. And Vesta in Cancer says, hey, but if you listen to your gut, to your feelings revolving around this, the emotional dynamics that are coming up, and you have the courage, Mars, to act on the desires that are being seeded in, it actually creates and cultivates emotional resilience, and it helps in facilitating the process of understanding that, hey, you can actually become more self-reliant and have healthier esteem when you act on your inner voice, your intuition, because you learn to trust yourself, and that creates emotional security. I know I can rely on myself to take care of myself. That's also seen with Mercury approaching a sextile to Vesta. So the other thing that I want to say is, if you look at Venus, Jupiter, the sun in Gemini during this full moon, they need to oppose, throw off old beliefs that are getting in the way of knowing your naturalness, your unique nature that is rooted in natural law as opposed to distorted man-made law. The inner awareness and knowledge that we've been cultivating is meant, looking at Mercury and Taurus, is meant to now be applied to the here and now, with the North Node of Mercury at 29 degrees, conjunct Venus and Jupiter. And as we apply this, this helps shift old patterns, cultivates new patterns, and then gives us more awareness, helps us to seek out more information about ourselves that then becomes even more deeper layers of inner knowledge and inner awareness. And that's seen by the sun in Gemini ruled by Mercury and the North Node of Mercury conjunct Venus and Jupiter, which are in a new phase and also in a crescent sextile to Neptune. Really, this is like speaking to trusting in yourself. This full moon is about trusting in yourself. And it helps facilitate and throwing off these old dynamics of where imbalances occurred stemming from old patterns. So I'm wanting to see if there's anything else I want to say about this full moon. And no, there's not. So I'm going to take this chart down and I'm going to speak to you all. So later on in the day after the full moon, that is when Venus is going to enter into the sign of Gemini and is going to be in mutual reception with Mercury in the sign of Taurus. Venus will still be ruling that South Node in Libra. It's going to be ruling Jupiter at the time of its ingress. It's going to be ruling Uranus as well. To me, this really reflects that energy of pulling in Mars in a new phase to the North Node, and also the full moon, and also the sun in Gemini, seeing as the sun and Venus are now ruled by Mercury in Taurus. This will be a month-long period transit, Venus and Gemini, of where we are taking in more information in order to create inner awareness that can help us release and let go of past patterns and to cultivate new patterns. And it's also teaching us about really tapping into our inner resources and our self-reliance through taking in new information about ourselves. I've written more extensively about this in the written report for this week. I will post the link to it in the description down below for this video. The other thing that I want to say is on the 24th, Venus is going to trine Pluto at 1 degrees. This is helping us to really, it's in a first quarter trine. So there can be an awareness around, we have limitations around our knowledge. And what it helps is for us to start thinking more for ourselves on a deeper level, seeing as Pluto is ruled by Uranus and Taurus. With Pluto retrograde, there can be instances where something is being repeated in order for us to be confronted with where there's a standstill on an internal level around our inner awareness about something. This can be seen in our relational dynamics. Venus and Gemini is helping us to understand more about relationships, seeing as it's the South Node's ruler. That way we can enter into more equitable relationships. So it can be where we're wanting to think for ourselves during this time, like, well, I learned about relationships in this way. This is the knowledge that I have. And that trine from Pluto to Venus and Gemini can really be, I want to learn a new way about relationships. Maybe you're someone who's understanding their values and their needs, and they're wanting to experience a variety of different types of relationships at this point in time, to learn more about equity and balance and harmony through the knowledge that is gleaned during this transit. And it becomes inner knowledge and inner awareness, and it sparks more ideas, and it cultivates our intuition on deeper levels. So really, that trine from Pluto to Venus is about throwing off where we have become crystallized in our thinking around limited knowledge, and the need to transform that, so that way we can then, on the 25th, Jupiter is going to enter Gemini, follow our intuition about the knowledge that we're meant to seek, as a way for it to become inner knowledge. And that is seen with Jupiter then being ruled by Mercury and Taurus. So we can be in this momentous time of expansion. And the need is with Venus and Gemini and Jupiter and Gemini to really, and both being ruled by Mercury and Taurus, the need to pay attention to when to retreat and when to seek. Because if we're just seeking and going to the next shiny thing, that can be a Gemini kind of issue. We're not having a full integration of what it is that we're coming to understand. And then there can be opposing thoughts. So it's really important to pay attention to, okay, I've had a lot of time out with people. I've been learning, I've been comparing and contrasting. And now I need to sit and have an integration of what I've been learning about. And this is even more so emphasized because on the 5th, Mercury in Taurus is going to be in conjunct the South Node in Libra in a full phase in conjunct. So this is also a time where we can have conversations with people that we're in relationships regarding our values and what we've been learning, and learning more about what our own expectations are, and if we need to release those. What we're learning about our natural needs, the ability, there's a call to really listen to where another one is coming from, instead of imposing upon what we expect them to think or to feel or to do. So there can be a lot of lessons during this time around our expectations. And the dynamic with Libra is, when we have the courage to speak about something, that person can do whatever they want with that information. It's not meant for us to control them. If they decide that they don't want to hear where you're coming from, well, then you have a choice to be made. And that is really seen with the nature of Venus and Jupiter and the Sun, all ruled by Mercury and Taurus in conjunct the South Node. There are dual choices to be made. There's a duality. Something I do want to talk about with Jupiter and Gemini is there is a need to really rely on the intuition about what information to seek in order to understand ourselves on deeper levels. The other dynamic on a global collective level is Jupiter and Gemini is where we can see more propaganda. And so if you have a strong intuition, you're going to be someone who knows the truth when you hear it. But I'm thinking of how, Jupiter can be about lies, and there can be information shared at this point in time that is not honest. It's actually in more of the Neptunian area of deception. And so it's really important to trust your intuition. And the other dynamic with Jupiter and Venus and the Sun, all in Gemini at the end of this week, is to not be duplicitous. That is an archetype. So it's the need to be honest and sincere with how you speak to others, how you are sharing yourself with others. If you feel like you have to be this way in front of this person, but behind closed doors, you are a different way, there is a lot of awareness that can come to the forefront around these dynamics for you to understand why you feel like you have to be inauthentic or dishonest in relationships. And so I want us to still be gentle with ourselves if that's something that comes up for you. It's an overcompensatory behavior, and overcompensation is a Jupiter phenomenon. And it's when we feel insecure, but we need to remember that, Vesta and Ceres are helping us obtain inner security. And then that's facilitating in the process with the Taurus energy that's still in the sky of becoming more self-reliant, which cultivates inner security. So I just wanted to speak about this. Later on this week, I'm probably going to expand upon Jupiter's transit and Venus's transit in the sign of Gemini. For right now, this is a lot of information. I do want to backtrack because there's one thing that I left out about the full moon, and I'm going to speak about this before I end this video. Juno in the sign of Virgo, which I've spoken about in prior weeks, is going to be trine Mercury and Taurus. During this full moon, there can be a lot of information on an intuitive level, like I said, of where we come to understand where we might have felt guilt or shame or been enslaved within relationships that we over devoted ourselves to in the past, stemming from a lack of insecurity on an emotional level and also a lack of self-reliance. And Mercury trining Juno helps us to self-improve upon this dynamic through cultivating inner awareness around this if you're utilizing the energy of the full moon to oppose old beliefs that perpetuated this type of dynamic stemming from conditioning. I know for me, growing up, I lived in a very consensus family system that is really into the indoctrination of religion. And so I am someone who identifies as a recovering masochist. And so I would enter into really terrible relationships where I over devoted Juno, myself, and became enslaved within them because I felt like I needed to prove myself and I felt guilt for having boundaries. And this was a direct result of my conditioning. I don't want to say that my family is bad. They are not. It's where they're at evolutionary wise. But the religious indoctrination that I received growing up had me dealing with things in a very Libra nature of inequality within relationships stemming from the patriarchal distortions of women needing to be subservient. So this kind of stuff can even be coming up during this full moon as a way to oppose the old beliefs by getting us to understand the BS, essentially. And so that's not going to be everyone. It's going to be some of you all. And I wanted to speak to that because this full moon can really help improve upon that by consciously self-reflecting on these dynamics and coming into an awareness that cultivates inner awareness and inner self-knowledge that becomes an inner resource later on. So that way you don't have to be in relationships like that anymore. So this is your weekly forecast. Like I said, later on this week, I will jump on here again and I will talk some more. I think that this is beautiful. It's a revolutionary full moon because it's pulling in Pluto, which is directly aspecting the moon and trining the sun. And Pluto is ruled by Uranus. That is ruled by this Venus in a new phase conjunction to Jupiter. this is something that can really help us start to understand our own unique values and needs, and how old beliefs that have been taught or learned have structured a distorted emotional reality for each one of us. I think that a lot of intuitive insight and awareness can come in during this week that helps cultivate an emotional maturation process, and helps to create inner security on an emotional level that then perpetuates um, healthy self-esteem and self-reliance. And so take this week, throughout the week, pose yourselves very Jupiter questions that you want to know about yourself, and don't try to analyze it. The thing with Jupiter is that whenever the time is right for that question to be answered, it will seed into your consciousness and you will know what you know without knowing why you know it. So it's a good practice for that. I hope to see you all throughout the weeks that are coming up. I hope to see more of my Gemini friends. I hope to get to know you all, and I can't wait to interact with you all, and I will talk to you all soon. Happy full Sagittarius moon.